I think it says so much that the concern about anarchism is that it could devolve back into something like government, right? Like, oh no, we can't have freedom because we might end up with the system we have now.
We have been waiting for the Hail Mary pitch of the national media just deciding to give us a bunch of attention and let us on the debate stage, and then we get to catapult to the White House. It's not going to happen.
And we say things like, what all Americans want is freedom. That's not true. We made that up. That's absolutely not true.
We need to agree on this one thing, and we need to go in there and hand these politicians their asses and say, you're done, we're in, and we're dismantling this money system, and we're going to bring the government back to the American people. And then once we give it back to the American people, guess what? The American people are going to decide what kind of society they want to live in.
Because the left started World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam. Those are all started by Democrats. Vietnam is only because they didn't want to go, because there was a draft.
You're Luke Skywalker, man. Tell me something important. Teach me something that matters that I don't know, or show me you're leading somebody else. And especially, I'm sorry, but we're the empire killing the sand people here and shit. This is so obvious, Luke.
They tried to get people canceled back then. They got some people canceled, but it was mostly politicians. It was mostly people in power. And when you play a power game, when you decide you're going to be a Machiavellian, you're expect to get your throat slit at some point, metaphorically. And so no, this is completely different. This is going after regular people.
As long as people look at other people as people, and we can remember and think about our humanity and our individualism, then I think that people are inherently good. And I think it takes outside forces to otherize people.
Why are we here? Why are we here? Because we care about these real issues, because these are real human beings who are suffering, whose lives are being ruined. Let's try to come together and brush some of this stuff off and deal with these really important issues. Because all this other stuff is like symptoms. It's symptoms of the central problem. And unless you solve the central problem, then we'll be fighting over Mr. Potato Head forever.
Hey guys, thank you for watching The Naturalist Capitalist. I am your host, Reed Coverdale, and yet again, I'm in the sleeper cab of my truck. I wanted to thank everyone for subscribing. I noticed I got a lot of new subscribers, probably since being on Part of the Problem with Dave Smith. That's not my typical intro there, actually. But if you want to see a lot more conversations like that, then make sure to subscribe. Today on the show, I've got a peacemonger from YouTube, a yoga instructor, and just an overall dangerous individual, Carey Wedler. How you doing tonight, Carey?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm doing good. So you're back on Twitter. That's kind of the new thing since we last talked, and that's cool.
Had I not rejoined at that point? Or I hadn't?
Maybe you had, but nobody knew you were there. But now everybody knows you're there again, so that's cool.
Cool. That should get me banned soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I've already made a few tweets that I've had to delete pretty quickly because I have a sizable account now, and I like the old days when it didn't matter. You just have nothing, so you don't have to
leave them up, man. You got to leave them up. Let everybody see.
Yeah, I know. So you're working on a couple videos right now, right? That are coming out soon. That's pretty cool.
I am. I tend to go into hibernation. I have a burst of videos and then I burn myself out. And I'm now coming out of the burnout again. So I'm trying to find ways to not burn out. But if you've ever seen my videos, they're quite intensive, and I do all the editing and everything but the audio cleanup because I'm cursed with bad audio despite my really nice microphone. It's just, anyway, other than that, I do all the work. So it can be quite tiring. So I'm trying to find alternate ways to get it done because I have things to say. But there should be a couple videos coming out. One's already done. It's already been released for my Patreon supporters, but I haven't released it publicly because I'm just waiting for a good news item for it to go with. And then I have one I just finished filming yesterday. I started editing it today. That'll be about gun control in California. From a Californian. That's me. I'm a Californian.
It's been very successful there, hasn't it? Gun control. There's basically no violence anymore.
No gun violence. No one has guns when they're not allowed to. There's no such thing as an illegal gun on the street. We just live in utopia here.
Well, that's good because I'm headed into California for the next 4 days, so I'm glad that I'll be safe.
Okay, to be fair, I love to make fun of California. The government is awful. I can take the internet beatings about being from California and loving California, but the nature really is, I mean, there's no, like, I don't want to go too far into the California hippie thing, but I will tell you, I've spoken to many people from around the country who come here and they're like, I came here and I thought it was so stupid, but after a few months, I just felt the energy, So it's here, it's palpable. And there are actually a lot of freedom lovers and a lot of people who disobey and could not care less about what the government tells them to do. So that's cool.
Yeah, I've been to all 50 states, most of them several times, and California wins. I mean, you're right, the government sucks, but
yes,
you guys have, I don't know have you been like all over California? Or
I've been most places. The only place I haven't been is like Humboldt County, the very, very far north part. Yeah.
There. Yeah, it's beautiful there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been all over California. It was one of the first states that I really explored. And I didn't know what to expect because I had this idea in my mind that it was all beaches and liberals, that was all in California. And then I was in the Sierra Nevada mountains and up in the redwoods and in the sequoias, and it blew my mind. Like you have a little. If I had to choose one state that I had to live in as far as geography goes, it would be California because you have a little bit of everything. Alaska might have some better mountains than you guys, and Hawaii has some nicer beaches, but you guys have like a little bit of everything. That's what makes it so cool.
You're selling it for me. That's always what I say is you have everything. There's mountains, there's lakes, there's beaches, there's deserts, there's forests, there's everything.
Yeah. So it's too bad the government exists because it's kind of ruined it for you guys.
Yeah, but you know what I think is astounding is that despite all the massive government and all of the I don't think that's the word, counter incentives, but all of the anti-incentives for people to be productive, it's still such a ridiculously powerful economy. And there's so many major industries here. It's really a marvel and a tribute to capitalism, really, and free markets that despite all of the overarching government, it's still incredibly productive and prosperous.
Yeah, you guys are annoying because being a truck driver, we have to do a lot of trucking to California. And you guys have like the most archaic system for getting permits. Everywhere else, you can get them digitally, like instantly. California, the tech capital of the country, you got to wait like 3 days and they paper fax them to you. It's so.
Try buying a gun here, though.
I'm good.
Fair enough.
Oh, yeah. So last time I had you on, even though I've been watching your videos for 7 years, I didn't really know who you were. I think David Fight kind of told you this when you were on with him. Like I only knew you from your videos because the first video of yours that I saw was the burning my bridge with Obama when you burn your shirt. And so I subscribed back then. And then throughout the 7 years, every time a video came out, I pretty much saw it. But I mean, as you were just saying, you're super intense in those videos, and that's who I thought you were. And then after I had you on and I realized how chill and cool and what an awesome person you are, I actually watched some of your other interviews that you did on other people's shows and then some of your speeches. I was like, okay, this isn't the person I thought it was at all.
I mean, that's a part of me. Like, I'm not faking it. When I am that intense and I am that passionate and I am just going off, that's real, but it's just not all of me. It's a compartmentalized area of me that I think is useful for spreading a message. But oh my god, if I was like that all the time, I couldn't live. Gotta relax and unplug.
Yeah, I've gotten I'm different on Twitter than I am in person. I'm a lot more sarcastic and a bit harsh, and I've invited people on the show before and they've been intimidated, and then they come on and they're like, oh, okay, you're not that bad. So, happens to all of us. But
dude, I've had people tell me at events, they're like, I'm scared of you, Carey. Like giant men. And I'm like, dude, really? Like you could snap me in half. You don't have to be afraid. I promise. We're on the same team. Don't be intimidated.
Yeah. No, your videos are really, really good though. I was just on Dave Smith's show today and I was talking about my political evolution over the years, and I was telling him I was obsessed with World War II in high school, especially the European theater, and just how fascist regimes could come to power so quickly and how terrible they were. And it actually scared me into being a neocon because I wasn't aware of the root causes of why that happens, what drives sane people to insanity, economic depression and being cast aside, and so basically what we do to countries all around the world by sanctioning them and bombing them, we radicalize them into crazy people. And so later on I started realizing that, and I didn't mention like any of the influences because we didn't have time in the video, but you were one of them for sure.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, in 2014, your first video that I saw, as I said, was the burning my last bridge with Obama, and I was still, a dumbass like Republican neocon, and so just anything against Obama was cool. But the second half of your video is about how the state is the problem. It's not Obama. Obama is just a figurehead of the state. The problem is government and coercion. So you were the first person who ever started influencing my mind in an anarchist way, or just like anti-state, anti-coercion. You're the first person who would actually call themselves an anarchist, at least. I mean, Rand Paul and Ron Paul and, some other people like that started influencing the way I think. But you were the first person who actually considered yourself an anarchist. And that was 7 years ago now, and it's been a slow journey in that direction, but everything that's happened over the last year has really pushed me a lot faster. When the government is really bad, it makes you look other places really quickly. And when I had you on a couple months ago, I was kind of on the edge. Like I've been talking with a guy named Magnus Panvidya, who's a mutualist anarchist, and I've been listening to Dave Smith and Spike Cohen, who ran, I don't know if you know Spike Cohen, he ran for, so he's an anarchist, even though he was running for office. But listening to all these people, they were pushing me closer and closer to the edge. And then I had you on, and then I read Lysander Spooner, Constitution of No Authority. I read Rothbard's Anatomy of the State. And I've pretty much accepted that I'm an anarchist now. So.
Well, it's kind of the natural state. And there's a great article by Dan Sanchez at fee.org for anyone who's interested. And I think it's called Between Two Rivers, I want to say. And he makes the case historically that civilization predates the state. Like the state can't exist without having wealth to leech off of to begin with. You can't have a government if they can't tax you. So inherently, humans are productive on their own, and then government steps in because they can't survive without extracting the wealth from the people. So, I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense. I know it's not the case for everybody, but it just fit with my mind. Reading that, reading Rothbard, reading Lysander Spooner, being in this community, watching Ron Paul get screwed over by the Republicans, just all these little things come together, and you start to look at the system holistically. And it's like, wait a minute, this is all connected. These aren't flukes. This corruption in every aspect of government. Maybe it's not just because it's not the right people in power. Like maybe this is a characteristic trait of the state.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like your evolution happened similarly to mine in that you didn't read the theory first. You started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and then you read the theory and you were like, oh yeah, of course, this guy is putting into words what I've been thinking. Is that accurate? Or
I'd say so, but it happened pretty rapidly, honestly. It was 2012. 2011, I found Ron Paul, and for a good year, I was like, you got to vote for Ron Paul. And then that summer, when obviously he got screwed over, it happened very quickly. Like, I think June, I was still hoping he was going to win. And by September, I was like, I'm an anarchist.
Yeah.
And that was honestly probably, as much as the theory is important and reading the philosophy is incredibly empowering and educational, seeing it firsthand and having your hopes dashed like that when you still believe in the system. And again, like that was what it was for me supporting Obama. So it was first believing in the system with Obama and being disenchanted, then believing we just had to get the right person in, and then realizing that if there were a right person, they would never be allowed to take power. Like, okay, if they're going to screw over Bernie Sanders and he's 3/4 of the way into the establishment anyway, they're never going to let anyone who's an actual threat in. So got to look for other solutions.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had been more tuned in when Ron Paul was running. I was a senior in high school in 2012, so I wasn't really paying that close attention to it. With me, it was actually Tulsi Gabbard. She turned me into an anarchist, I guess you could say, a couple ways. One was, I already disagreed with her on a lot of things when I worked for her on her campaign. but I didn't realize how strongly I cared about gun control. I mean, because I've been a gun guy my whole life. You don't realize like how much you care about that until you're campaigning for someone who doesn't agree with you on it. It's like, ow, yeah, you know, that really hurt. But so there was that. But then also what you were just pointing to, that anyone who's any sort of threat is not going to be allowed anywhere near the top. And if they somehow get there, they'll just get rid of them. I mean, Trump was not anti-establishment. You know, I think like 1 out of 10 times he'd probably oppose the narrative, you know, just in rhetoric. And that was enough for them to be really angry that he existed and to frame him as a traitor and, you know, whatever else, instead of going after his actual shortcomings. But
well, because they agree with the actual shortcomings. They perpetuate the propaganda for the shortcomings. So they got to focus on the little differences, divide people, make them think it's the biggest deal. And just not to derail your train of thought. If I am, cut me off now. Were you finished? Okay. There was actually, I remember, it must have been 2000, it was 18 or 19. I think it was 18 or 19, but there was a whole controversy. McCain was still, he'd either recently died or was still alive. And they had named the NDAA after John McCain. And Donald Trump threatened to veto it or something because of that. And there was no conversation in the media whatsoever about the fact that this bill funds the empire. It's all the overseas contingency operations. It sustains all of the corruption, all of the military industrial complex. And Jake Tapper, who once called out Obama, or Jay Carney, his press secretary, once called him out for extrajudicial assassinations. Jake Tapper's throwing a tantrum on CNN because Donald Trump is mean to John McCain. And it's just like, that's the issue. You guys had such an opportunity to do real journalism, and you got mad because a neocon was allegedly insulted by another warmonger. Like, I can't. Yeah. And it's like, I'm not surprised. I'm never surprised when I see this. But actually, to be honest, the last couple of years since anti-media was banned and I'm not in the news, like in the news cycle all the time, I actually am surprised. I've forgotten how outrageous the media really is, because I used to be in it every day, like reading headlines, and a lot of our content was debunking media narratives, like counter narratives, we called them, where you're inserting something to oppose this predominant belief that's being pushed. And not being in that every day, I forget how deranged the media is. And when I look, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And people take it seriously. Okay, interesting. Cool. Good to know. Like, pop my bubble. Back in the statist reality.
Yeah, so I wonder, you come from the left and I come from the right. I actually get more pissed off at the right because not that they've been any better than the left, but I want them to be, or I had expected them to be at one point. Do you feel that way with the left, or do you get more pissed off with them? Yeah.
Yeah, but I really can't say, like, it could be because I come from there. I see all the hypocrisy and the inconsistencies, and I'm frustrated that people are still stuck in it. But it could also just be that liberals are so freaking obnoxious. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know which it is, but like, I know conservatives are obnoxious. I always have this conversation with my anarchist friends. We're just like, which is worse? Like, who's more annoying? Who's more insidious? And I think it depends on what, like, the news cycle and who's complaining and who's throwing a tantrum, you know? But I will say, I think the left somehow is more self-righteous. Like, they're so far up their own asses with like how wise they think they are and how compassionate and how tolerant and how understanding. Yet their entire belief system is rooted in coercion and violence and control. And so for me, that's, but then it's also really frustrating because the right is like that too. And they really think they love freedom. The left doesn't pretend to love freedom. They they openly scorn freedom, you know, and mock it and say it's selfish. The right, I don't know. They're both frustrating. I could go on and on. It's just ping pong ball my way back and forth.
Yeah, the right doesn't pretend to be tolerant and the left doesn't pretend to love freedom, but the opposing sides do pretend to do those things. So, I mean, they're so fake. And I know what you mean by like, when you zone back into the establishment media and you listen for a few minutes and you talk to your friends who are still in that zone. I mean, it makes me nauseous. I mean, it's just, especially when it's people I care about who are still thinking that way. It's just like, really? Like, this is really what you think? You can't see outside of this. And I guess I'm glad that I'm red pilled and I'm seeing it the way it is. But sometimes I just want to go back, or I just want to like forget, or I just want to like not know what's going on because it's so infuriating. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's a cozy little bubble. to believe that the government cares for you and you can trust them and they're looking out for you. And they would never do anything like that, you know, despite even in public school history books, they tell you what they did, you know, not the full extent of it, but like just enough for you to think that you can trust them to give you information, you know. Oh yeah, the government did that, they did that. One little sentence on the Federal Reserve here and there, you know, like, but yeah, it's a lot of discomfort to be catapulted out of your cocoon or the cave. I just saw a great meme about Plato's The Cave today, but it's very uncomfortable. But as much as I feel, sometimes I am like, man, it would be so easy to just go back, but I couldn't. I don't think you would either. I don't think any of us would. Most of us wouldn't.
No. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't think I would. It's just in certain moments, it's just like, oh my God, I wish I didn't know this. Or I wish I didn't care about this because nobody else cares. I think that's what's aggravating is that there's so few of us who care. And so sometimes you just want to give up and just be like, oh, fuck it. Like, who cares? I mean, no one's paying attention. Yeah, I mean, with the whole, this is kind of where I've arrived with anarchy is that I don't have a solution for all the problems, and I'm not utopian, and I'm not naive to think that getting rid of the state gets rid of all our problems. It's more that I just realized the state is not solving any of our problems. I would liken it to if you're like stabbing yourself in the leg with a knife and someone tells you, hey, stop stabbing yourself.
Sorry, it's my dog.
That's all right. Great dog, by the way.
She's gotten very vocal the last couple of weeks. Sorry about that. She's feeling what you're saying.
But I mean, it's like you're stabbing yourself in the leg repeatedly and someone comes up and tries to stop you. And they say, look, stabbing yourself is causing the problem. And you say, what? You think if I stop stabbing myself, I'm just going to instantly heal and everything's going to be fine? Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. You're going to have to do other things, but stop stabbing yourself in the leg. Like that's not doing you any favors. That's kind of where I've arrived with government. The government is just literally not a solution for anything.
Right. And, you know, I think there's something so telling about even the question people ask of like, oh, well, how would it work? How would you deal with this? How would you deal with that? And I think it's so reflective of this idea that there has to be a central authority who knows everything and solves everything. Like me, I'm just some girl on the internet, dude. I have some ideas for solutions that you scoff at. Sure.
Right.
I have some ideas that I can point out examples of what's already happening. But the question itself, I found with the people who ask it, who usually don't really want a sincere answer. They just want to like poke holes in any idea you have because they're so triggered by the idea of anarchism as opposed to statism. But it's just like, why would I know? And if I presume to know, don't listen to me. If I'm going around talking like I have the answer to every problem in society and how to fix it, no, I'm the wrong person to ask. Do not trust people who act like they know everything. That is not the nature of freedom. It's not the nature of economics. We all have special knowledge. And that's what makes it all work because we all have unique things to bring to the table to offer that other people are going to want to engage in. And that's the beauty of freedom and liberty. And I don't have all the answers. And it's actually really relieving to just accept that, you know, because I used to put all the pressure on myself of like, oh, I have to be able to explain exactly how an anarchist society would. No, I don't. Like maybe there are many people who have great ideas on many different topics. And then there are people who are out there creating things that are disrupting the state. So put all that together, and I feel like we could come up with some nonviolent ways to cooperate with each other.
Yeah, and it kind of proves that the utopia is really on the side of the statists because they're the ones who are saying that they do have the one size fits all answer, the one solution. Where we're not saying that. We're saying that we want a free marketplace of ideas to combat all these problems. We don't think that just violently coercing people into our idea of what the solution is actually going to fix anything. I mean, it's really been eye-opening for me who the utopians are because the anarchists are always framed as the utopian ones where you get into a discussion with someone who's a statist and they say, well, we can just fix the government. We can just make the government do what we want it to do. And it's like, when has that ever happened and stayed that way? You know, like when? Give me an example. Like, who's the utopian here?
It's funny you say that because that's what Tulsi Gabbard said to me because I asked her a question. You've seen that video, yeah? And it was like, oh, bless your heart, you know? Like, I believe that you believe that. Like, you wouldn't be running for president if you didn't really believe that. And I have some issues with her policies. Like, she's not against drone war. She's not against the war on terror. Obviously, all of the progressive domestic policies I was opposed to, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I got a sense of like she genuinely wanted to change things, and she's just a statist who believes that that's the way to do it. But that's specifically what she said to me, because the question I posed, also from Dan Sanchez at FEE, actually, was, if you can see how inefficient and corrupt and violent the military is, can you not apply that same observation and understanding to every other agency of government and every other function? And that was her response of like, well, we just got to get the right people. I don't know. I feel like people who have been voting for centuries were not intentionally voting in the wrong people. They thought they were voting in the right people. Like, who goes to vote and they're like, well, I'm sure there are some trolls who are like, yeah, I'm just going to vote for like the worst people. But overall, that's not what people do. Sincere voters who really think they're being heard go in there, and they genuinely think they're voting for good people. And even if there were good people, look at Ron Paul. How much did he actually accomplish? We talked about this last time, I think. How much, or maybe this was, sorry, I've done a lot of interviews lately, but his real strength came not from policy, but from having a platform to talk about liberty. It wasn't that he was like so effective in Congress. He wasn't. And how could he be? He was completely opposed, like he was what they call him, like Mr. No or Dr. No or something.
Dr. No, yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't getting anyone or everyone on his side, but he was able to reach literally millions of people. He reached me. And I never knew his congressional record. I looked at it, obviously, when I decided to vote for him, but he reached me just by speaking about liberty. So that was way more effective than his votes in Congress.
Yeah, since you brought it up with Tulsi Gabbard, I actually watched that video that you put out before I met her. I was contemplating supporting her, and I saw your video. It was, you actually probably gave the fairest opinion out of anyone I watched of her, because you were... most libertarians said about her is like, well, she's kind of good on one issue. And I was like, well, I mean, not really. She's good on some other issues. In fact, war isn't the issue that she's best on, as you just pointed out. Like, she's better on the drug war than she is on actual war. And she's good on like the Patriot Act and stuff. But what I thought was really interesting is the second half of that video, you pointed out what an individualist she was personally, like the idea that she believes that we all have to bring our own creative ideas to make the world a better place, and that there's just this really obvious disconnect there. And I felt that too when I was on her campaign, because I know her personally, and I remember arguing with her about gun control, because she'd be so against the drug war because of the surveillance that you need, basically, and the tyrannical enforcement behind it. I was like, yeah, but you need that with these gun laws you want to pass too, if you want them to be effective at all. It really is amazing, like how, I mean, I could tell talking to her too that she could see what I was saying.
Right.
And I don't know, it's just mind-boggling. I don't get that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this sense of like, well, and I think that's inherent to democracy, because we're trained to believe that democracy is a representation of our views. And, I talk about this all the time, because it has just stuck out to me over the years. Every time there's an election, sorry, I'm cracking my fingers. I don't know if that picked up on the audio. I'll stop. But over the years, I've just noticed it's always your vote, your voice. Therefore, I am the government. We are the government, blah, blah, blah. Right. But it's kind of inherently contradictory, because if everyone believes that, but people have polar opposite views, first of all, even if you got everyone in that agreed with you and you're going to have this policy, there would be massive resistance. First of all, you're never going to get everyone in who agrees with you. Even if you were able to, all that would happen is people would come out and vote and you go back the other direction. And that's what has been happening in this country. It's Democrats back to Republicans, back to Democrats, back to Republicans. So even if this were a legitimate system, like barring any moral exceptions to it, it still wouldn't be effective, because you have however many, 320, I don't even know anymore, a lot of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in this country who are expected to live harmoniously under one government run by, I don't know how many people work in the federal government, but certainly in Congress, it's what, 435? Maybe that's the House. And then there's
538 altogether.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I would fail a civics test, which is funny, because I did fantastic in high school when I was, had to memorize all my little facts, and now they're just gone. It is not relevant information to me. But yeah, just inherently, it's polarizing, and it's a constant power struggle. You're never going to accomplish what you want.
Yeah. So the other thing you were talking about right before in the last little bit there was about Ron Paul. having a platform instead of just a voting record. And I agree, like the voting record's important because if you say something and then vote a different way, like you're
Right.
a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But the messaging really is important. And I talk about this a lot because Rand Paul has a pretty good voting record, but he is horrible at messaging. I mean, his messaging is all about like Trump is great, you know, the GOP is where liberty lovers belong, and it's really pissed me off. And people get upset at me because they'll be like, well, his voting record is good. And I was like, yeah, but he's one of 100 in the Senate, and like 3 other people might vote the same way as him sometimes. So does it really matter if his voting record is good? But he has such a large platform and is able to reach so many people, and he just butchers the messaging. He says like the cops are, you know, that we need to fund the police more, and you know, I don't know, that just really pisses me off. Like I think you really struck me with that when you said that in our last video, that Ron Paul's platform was more important than his position in office, because that's totally true. And that's why I've been so hard on Rand Paul, because he doesn't get that.
I completely agree. I have nothing to add. I'm not the biggest Rand Paul fan. But why would I be? He's a statist. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just I obviously have very different ideas on the ultimate solutions. Obviously, there's a lot of common ground, and props to him. I remember when he filibustered, I think it was domestic drone surveillance, I want to say, like I think Obama was still president. Good for him. That's awesome. I've been engaging in a practice the last couple of years of not just rejecting people because I disagree with them, of like, hey, there's some common ground. Okay, cool. They're still people. I may think they're wrong and have really stupid ideas, but hey, I can see their intentions. They're not sociopaths. They mean well. And it's a lot more peaceful that way, honestly, because my list was long of everybody who I had to be mad at because they weren't anarchists, you know? Like, it's not worth the energy.
So do you think Ron Paul's an anarchist? Because he actually tweeted out something a few weeks ago that sounded like Lysander Spooner. He was talking about how the Constitution was useless, and I was like, damn, like maybe he's come all the way too. I mean, do you think he is an anarchist, just running it and had to run as a constitutionalist, or?
I mean, he was friends with Murray Rothbard. He's like a hardcore free marketer. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but there are a couple videos on YouTube. If you just type in Ron Paul anarchist, he talks about it. He's been asked. And I think he even says an anarchist is a wonderful thing to be. It means you take responsibility for yourself and you don't engage in coercion. So he's at the very least very familiar with the philosophy and with its main tenets. And I mean, he's spoken at Anarchapulco several years in a row. And he doesn't talk about anarchy. He usually talks about war and stuff. But I mean, if he were that opposed to anarchy, why would he be going to a conference with anarchy in the name? You know, watch those videos on YouTube. I think they're very telling.
Yeah. So the other thing you said in our last video that stuck was what you liked about Ron Paul so much was that he loved freedom more than he just hated the government. And I think that's really important because you've talked about how you've gotten really depressed and angry at everything and, you know, kind of losing hope or whatever. And I've been there too. Like I've not just in hating the government, but just in life. Like I ended up in the hospital because I was so, there was nothing physically wrong with me, but I was so just distraught with where I was in life and what I was doing. And I realized like I've got to be reaching for something, not just opposing everything that I don't like that's going on. You did a very moving video about this. I can't remember if it was 2015 or something. You got in a car accident and it kind of realigned your thinking. You want to talk about-
and then 5 days later I went right back to my bullshit. It took a lot more work, but it felt really good in the moment. But just quick, I almost died in a really bad car accident. Car was completely total, hit a semi. And for like a good 5 days, actually, had I died, I would have gone out in my head, completely neurotic, ruminating, suffering, not present, not in my body, just completely disconnected and like just not in a good place. And so surviving that, I have a little, oh no, you can't, can you see it? I have a little scar right there if anyone can see it. That's all that happened to me. And a concussion and like some neck soreness, but you know, coming out of that without dying, that definitely shifted my perspective. And I wouldn't say, I mean, it didn't change my life because we have a lot of ingrained habits and beliefs and internal narratives, but it was the first time I think I felt aware of like, wow, the present moment matters. Like life matters, you know, I don't want to spend my life being miserable and suffering. And it took several years, I think, before I really understood the implications of that little lesson, you know, like, oh, I can't just almost die and then I'm healed, you know, like I have to actually put in some work and be responsible for myself and my feelings and my emotions and blah, blah, blah. But that was a big turning point.
Yeah. So, are you religious or spiritual at all? Do you believe in God or anything, or how do you, what gives you hope from day to day?
I'm definitely spiritual. I don't believe in a central authority God, you know, like, I can't, but I can't really imagine. I don't begrudge anyone who does, as long as they don't want to force their will on me in the name of God. But I definitely believe there's something beyond our little speck of human existence. You know, there's no way this is it. And I'm a California hippie. Like I was raised by a California hippie. I'm into all the woo woo stuff, but we don't have to go into that. But it's more just a sense when you look at all these religions and the things that I'm into, the common theme that I see, and I'm not a religious scholar, I could be wrong, somebody could correct me, but there are some common themes of like compassion, caring for others, nonviolence, you know, it's just really simple stuff. And it seems to be a through line. And I don't think it's a coincidence that around the world, whether you're talking about Buddhism or Christianity, these things come up. And to me, that's become really the foundation of my personal life, of practicing these things for myself first, so I can practice them for other people. And it's super in line with libertarianism and anarchism, as far as I'm concerned. I gave a talk. I'm not trying to plug myself. It's just I've already spoken about it, so I don't need to go into detail. But I gave a talk in 2016 at Anarchapulco. If you just type in Carey Wedler yoga, it should come up. And it's about yogic philosophy and how in line it is with anarchism. And it's just, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me and that makes so much sense is personal responsibility. Like, even if you're getting into I do a lot of podcasts by Tara Brach. She's like a Buddhist, leftist leaning, retired therapist / meditation teacher. She's absolutely wonderful. What comes up so much is even when you're talking about those things, it's personal responsibility. You're responsible for your feelings. Nobody else is responsible for them. And I think that's so lacking in society and culture at large, and in statism, you know, like it's that kind of underpins people's beliefs is you're responsible for my feelings. You're responsible for my safety. You're responsible for whatever it is. And then they absolve themselves of any responsibility to themselves. And it's the same thing with our internal psychology. And I think it's the same thing when we're talking about, to bring it back to Ron Paul, talking about how he loved freedom more than he hated the government. I say this with love, and I say this with personal experience, but I think there are a lot of people in our community who really like to lash out at government and blame government for all their problems. And it becomes this fixation of like projection. And yes, the government is criminal. It's murderous. They're sociopaths. They're war criminals. That's all true. And you're right to be angry. I don't want to diminish the anger, because I get angry too. But what I noticed in myself is I had a lot of my own issues that I was just bombing it out with the government. And so all that like rage behind my voice, I was mad at the government, and I was right to be. But when I really checked in with myself, I was like, okay, so this issue X, like being silenced by anti-media, that was a really difficult thing for me. And I had every right to be angry, every right to be upset and traumatized and hurt. And a lot of the suffering came because it was opening up old wounds that had absolutely nothing to do with politics and government. It was like, I'm not being heard. I'm not, that relates to something that happened before I ever knew about Ron Paul. And I think that when we check in with ourselves in that way, it's always there. And again, that doesn't mean we're not right to be angry. We're not right to have a response or to be outraged. But I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot of wisdom internally when we just turn toward it, as opposed to like getting on Twitter and raging, and you can do that too. But I think it's very valuable to check in with yourself. And, even just before you get online and you start scrolling and commenting, like maybe try meditation. I have to meditate every day before I go online. Like that's my rule. I have to meditate. And if I don't, my day is quite noticeably more on edge. I'm more reactive. Things bother me more. I'm more impatient. And I'm not saying that if I meditate every day, I'm never going to be impatient. I'm never going to be upset. I'm never, of course I am. Duh. Like there's no way to avoid it. I could meditate for 45 minutes and then walk outside and like stub my toe and be mad. It's life. There's no guarantee of anything, but I think there's a lot of value. And I think it aligns very much with our philosophy to go inward with yourself in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I call myself an atheist, and I hate the connotations that brings with it, because people I hate labels, but I mean, you know, the name of my show, Naturalist Capitalist, is 2 labels right there. I mean, it's just unavoidable, especially in the internet. You know, I like YouTube more than Twitter, because people can actually explain what their philosophy is, and they can actually explain where they're coming from. But Twitter sucks. I piss off so many religious people on Twitter. But I really do have a spiritual side to me, and I don't really like that word, just because it also brings connotations with it. But the idea that you have to believe in a centralized authority figure, as you put it, a God, to meditate or to appreciate nature or to appreciate love or honesty or courage or any of those things, to me is really weird. So I really like what you're saying about focusing on the positive aspects of those religions, because you've made a great video. Statism is the most dangerous religion. I think that's totally accurate. And the religious parts of religion are what I really don't like the rigid control, the brainwashing, the fear mongering. If you diverge from the religion, that something terrible is going to happen to you after. All the good half of religion is great, which is more what you're talking about, like personal, whether you call it faith or personal, endeavors to try to connect with something bigger than yourself, or an idea that's bigger than yourself. Like, I really, I don't know, like that type of thing really inspires me. And I really care about those types of things. And I think that it's unfortunate that people who don't believe in God think that they don't have the ability to still search for those things. You know what I mean? Like, they think that they have to be religious to care about existential ideas. And I don't think you have to be. I mean, existential ideas exist even scientifically. There are things that are bigger than humanity that we can't control. There are concepts that we can't change to fit our liking or whatever. We're part of the system, and it's way bigger than us, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm just talking, but
no, totally. I mean, I think something that's, and maybe I'm diverging right here, but you mentioned nature. And to me, I think it's such a wonderful symbol and example of how interconnected everything is without force or coercion. Like, I was in the Sequoias for my birthday last year, and oh my God, incredible. If you have an opportunity to go, I know it's a national park, but you must go. You have to go if you're in California and you like nature. But just looking at the forest and walking around the forest and placing it in the context of nature at large, nobody forces anything. Everything gets done. Everything, like it's its own ecosystem, and it happens naturally. And to me, that's the same as any kind of spirituality. Like, I'm interconnected with the world, with the universe. And I know not everybody's into the universe, but if God works for you, replace the universe with God. Right. Yes. And the beautiful thing too, at least in the practices I do, I'm not going to say they're the only thing to do and it's the right way to do it, but I know what works for me. And so much of the practices are coming to an understanding and an awareness that everything you need is already inside of you. That wisdom, that compassion, it's in you. You may not be able to access it, but even something is like, you're suffering. You're just like, you're really not okay. And I've been there. I've been there many times where I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. I wasn't made to be human. This is not working for me. But like, and in those moments, it's like, oh, I suck. I don't care. I hate myself, genuinely. Like, I really don't like myself. It's been a while since I've been there because I'm really dedicated to my practices, but I still suffer. Anyway, point being, in those moments where you feel like you have nothing to give, you have no love, you have no compassion, it can be as simple as just like putting your hand on your heart. That's an act of care of like, man, this is really difficult right now. Just an awareness that you are not your suffering. You're not your pain. It's there. You can't avoid it. You're going to have to feel it, but you don't have to identify with it. It's there's a great quote Tara Brach mentions a lot, and I don't know who said it. It's in one of her talks or podcasts, but it's, you are the sky and everything else is the weather. So there's this awareness, there's this foundation you have. It doesn't mean you're never going to feel discomfort. You're never going to be miserable. You're never going to be truly suffering. You're going to suffer no matter what. That's part of being human, unfortunately. I wish it weren't the case, but it is. So it's not saying that you're never going to suffer. It's just saying you are not the suffering. You don't have to identify with the suffering, and you can recognize it as a part of your experience, but it's not who you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting speaking to people who aren't religious, and speaking to people who are religious and they need like a religious quantification for reason to do anything is almost like talking with statists. It's a very similar overlap. When I don't understand what that is innate in human nature, to need some sort of ruler or some sort of standard, some sort of law to make us feel like we can do anything. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Like, people are so unimaginative, they can't see outside of that box, both with anarchy and what we're talking about right now. They need somebody telling them what to do and setting the parameters for them, and they're uncomfortable without that. So where do you think that comes from? Is that just our culture for however many thousand years, so it's hard to break out of? Or
I mean, I don't know what the balance is, and I could be totally wrong. I'm sure there's someone who has a much better take on this than I do, but I think it is part human nature. Tribalists, it was conducive to survival to be part of a tribe, to be on a team. I just started reading, I think it's called The Righteous Mind. It's by Jonathan Haidt. I've never read anything else by him. I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with him, but that was something I read just in his intro. That's as far as I got the intro, but I'm going to read more tonight. I just started it and I just got it. But I think in part it's kind of evolutionary, but I don't think that means it has to be violent coercion. Like, I think you can have voluntary groups for survival. So I think a lot of it, and again, I could be wrong, but this is training we get from really childhood, because our parents are indoctrinated in the system. Their parents were indoctrinated in the system. It's just what's passed down to us. So on top of having our parents, who are really like the biggest authority figures in our early lives, on top of having them set this model for us, and it's not like they're consciously saying, you can't do anything on your own, you need the government to tell you what to do. It's not that, but it's like years and years of modeling and submission and compliance. I'm not saying they're bad for doing it. This is what they were taught to do. Then on top of that, you have all the schooling with all the democracy propaganda. I mean, it's kind of like most people don't have a chance, but they do have a chance, because I believed all of that. Like, I was not, there are a lot of people who are like, I always knew the system was bullshit. I always knew that the government was, they didn't have any real authority. And I'm like, really? Because I didn't. Like, I went to kindergarten terrified that I was going to break a rule and get in trouble. I remember specifically, it was the first day of kindergarten, and there was a little clown thing we had to color with crayons, and it was a packet, and we were supposed to cut the clown out. And I was 5 years old, and I accidentally cut the whole packet like, instead of one sheet. And I had a meltdown, and I am a very sensitive person, but just that sense of like, oh my God, I'm doing it wrong, and there's a way to do it, and I'm going to get in trouble, and it's going to be bad and wrong. Like, I think that's a big driver. And honestly, I couldn't even play Duck, Duck, Goose. That was the first time I ever resisted, because I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to fail. I don't want to be under a microscope. I don't want to be judged. And when there are a lot of kids who go to school and feel that way. Some kids excel in public school, and that's the right thing for them, and they have a great time. A lot of kids don't. And I was one of those kids, but I had this contradiction of it causing me so much anxiety and being so scared and being under constant stress and like really needing a teacher's approval or an authority's approval to feel like I was okay and I was right. There's that. And then actually I forgot my train of thought. I'm sorry. I take that back, but maybe I'll remember it later. I knew where I was going with it, and now it's gone. But it's a sense of like, you get this validation out of it, and at the same time, you're being indoctrinated into it. So it's this weird sense of empowerment, especially with the democracy education. This is not my real point that I was trying to make, but it kind of feels somewhere related to what I was trying to say. But regardless, point being, a lot of people, it's not, and again, that actually brings it back to what I was talking about, our own issues that have nothing to do with the government, like my sensitivity to feeling like I had to be accepted, I had to be perfect. I love my parents so much, and I'm close to them, and they're wonderful, and they support what I do, but that was messaging I got at home. Of like, oh, you're lovable because you're so good, and you're so smart, and you're so XYZ, and it's like, oh no, if I fuck that up, I'm not going to be lovable anymore. Crap, I got to get the people at school to love me. I have to be on my game, and it'll mess a kid up. And I have so many friends who feel the exact same way, who it was like being called on in school was horrifying and terrifying. And I know I've kind of strayed from the original question, which is about indoctrination versus human nature, or whatever it is, as far as believing you need somebody outside of you to be enough, to be okay, to succeed, for society to be okay. But really, that is something we learn in school, because you become dependent on these teachers, these authority figures. And what if you fail? That must feel awful. to fail a test, to not be in like the gifted classes. There's so many messages children get in public schools that are literally, you're not enough. You're not okay as you are, especially with the issue of drugging kids. Oh, they're too hyper. They can't sit still for 9 hours because it's a 7-year-old kid who needs to run and use his body, put him on drugs. He can't comply. He's wrong. He needs us to make sure that he fits in. So it becomes this just dependence on people who are painted to you as authority figures when really they don't really know what they're doing. But I know it's possible to break out of it because of someone like me, who I used to get mad when people like skipped school. One of my best friends was like super he just didn't care. And he would just not go to school certain days. And I'd be like, you can't do that. I'm going to school every day. I'm following the rules. How dare you not go to school? You know,
Yeah.
and I thought that I thought I needed school to be okay. I didn't really, but take that with the civics education, and so much of the messaging we receive, especially in the era of COVID, is I don't know what's best for me. I need somebody else to decide and to take care of it.
Yeah, well, we're mirror images of each other because I was just as much of a statist just on the right. I mean, there were plenty of things that when I was younger that I thought people should not do, and they were just more social things. I think people forget how recent in our past, and some of it's not even in our past, like the drug war still isn't even in our past, but how like anti-drug things were 15, 20 years ago, or how anti-gay marriage we were 20 years ago, like even 10 years ago. Like it hasn't been that long that it's been legal in all 50 states. Like people forget that. So conservatives have a statist past behind them too, for sure. And, you know, still exist with it. It seems that the world is becoming less religious but more statist, and that might not be correct, but that's my general feeling, and I don't think that's a good trend. I agree that statism is the worst religion by far. I don't like the idea of religion in general, but religion in itself is voluntary. I mean, they might use scary stories of what happens to you after you die if you don't join them, but at the end of the day, you're still allowed to join them or leave them in most countries. And statism is not optional. You get shot if you don't comply. So that seems like a dangerous trend. I would rather we be more religious and less statist. But do you think that's accurate, first of all? And what are your general thoughts on that?
I actually don't know as far as people becoming less religious in a traditional sense, just because I haven't seen any data on that. So I'll take you at your word for that. And yeah, if they're becoming less religious and government is becoming more pervasive and people believe in it as this all powerful, omnipotent authority that can save them, yeah.
Not good.
It's not a good thing. And it's funny because I've been watching this series called The Americans. It's one of the best shows I've ever seen. If you're interested at all in politics, history, whatever, wonderful show, good writing, great writing, amazing writing, whatever. And the point is, in that show, it focuses on like KGB spies. And in a lot of it, they're very opposed to religion. And it's like, well, it makes sense. And that's a foundation of communism, no religion. Like the religion is the state. And so it's not really surprising to me that as people are moving to the left and becoming more dependent on government, if it's the case that they're losing religion, I'm not surprised whatsoever. But it's also the case that people on the right are very religious about their statist beliefs. Like, stomp my flag, I'll stomp your face. Oh my God, really? A piece of cloth? You're going to be that offended and you're going to be defending it in the name of your God. And they don't say it that way, but it's hard for me to view it anyway else, that you would go like you would literally harm someone, initiate violence against someone because they insulted a symbol of your religion. I can't, then the leftists are just as bad, just not on that. They have their own things that they'll fight you for, but it's, private property or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you're pointing to a horrifying thought, which is that as the left becomes less religious, they become more statist. And as the right becomes more religious, they still become more statist. It's like it's just a no-win situation. The right just combines their religion with the state, and the left embraces the state the more they leave religion. So it's just
And then the best part is they mock religious people, and it's like, oh my God, you are missing the joke here, man. You're the joke. Wow, you hate religion, but you worship at the altar of government. Okay, cool. And I'm here in LA, so it is like and I was part of the spiritual communities as well. So it was very frustrating for me to see these really well-intended people who were spiritual. I wouldn't say religious as far as I know, really well-intended, really just wanted to help people espousing these values of like what I was talking about. Yoga philosophy is very much in line in anarchism as far as personal responsibility. And you hear that in yoga classes here. It's like, well, nobody knows what the right pose is, but you. I'm even as the yoga teacher, I can't tell you how far to go into the pose. Only you know. You're responsible. If you hurt yourself, it's your fault. Like, you've been warned, like all of this personal responsibility sentiment. And then it's like, oh, we need to vote for more taxes and Bernie Sanders. And they're completely unaware of the fact that there's a fanaticism to that. And I think it's inherent. If you believe that a violent institution and a politician with a spotty track record, Bernie Sanders is not principled. I made a video on it. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be upset that I just said that. So it's not really worth a tangent, but
not in this audience.
Right. Exactly. Like, if that's who you're turning to and you're placing that responsibility on somebody else in a violent institution, when you're preaching peace, you're a fanatic. I'm sorry. Like, you just, and it's like in Game of Thrones. I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but I can't even remember his name anymore. I need to rewatch the series except the last season. But anyone who watches the show, you know who I'm talking about. And he's an absolute fanatic. And there's a great quote I'm not going to take the time to Google it, but basically it's just saying like, oh yeah, fanatics believe they're always right. That's a trait of fanatics. And it's like, you look at both sides and it's like, oh my God, you guys, like, it's not possible that you're both right, because you're screaming at each other and you have, well, honestly, very similar views, but
you're right.
As long as we're in the matrix, we have very different views between Republicans and Democrats, right? And they're like just pointing fingers at each other, not real. Anyway, I'm just going to go off on a tangent of complaining and I don't want to do that. But yeah, statism is a religion and more people are gravitating toward it, but to not be just pessimistic this past year and just the more what's the word? I can't think of the word. The more audacious, that's not the word I'm looking for, but the more audacious and the more bold government gets in how corrupt they are, in how violent they are, in how deceitful they are. Every time they do that, that's ripe soil for converting people, and that's what it's done. The last year, there have been so many people who question the system who never questioned it before. So like, keep on keeping on, government. Do your thing. You're going to do it anyway. Thank you for making our job easier.
Yeah, the worse they are, the easier our job is.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm becoming an accelerationist. The only thing that worries me is looking through history. When a government like ours fails, it seems that something worse always ends up taking its place. It seems like people turn to an autocrat or a dictator instead of a failed democracy. That's honestly what I'm most worried about, is that I don't see us descending into harmony. I see us descending into chaos pretty quickly. And I've got you really ought to do a video with Magnus Panvidya, the guy I mentioned earlier. That would be really interesting to watch. I'd like to hear you guys talk about this idea. But he foresees the United States descending into a Syrian-style civil war.
God, and I hope he's wrong.
Well, me too. But I don't know if he is. And if we go there, I think that's not going to last very long, and people will turn to an extremely authoritarian figure to stop the violence. That's honestly all I'm worried about. I mean, I hate what we have now. It's already authoritarian as shit. They're already awful. We're the number one exporters of terrorism around the world. I'm just worried that whatever replaces this isn't going to be any better, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they probably won't, especially if it's done through political means, i.e. voting, or even violent revolution. I mean, look at violent revolutions throughout history. They tend to produce corrupt and massive states, however noble the revolution itself, because that's just the nature of government. But I do think, honestly, sincerely, and this is how I stay positive, is that the more untenable government gets, the more oppressive, the more authoritarian, the more they show their true colors, the less effective they are, the more they run out of wealth to tax, to steal, to redistribute. As this goes on, it doesn't matter how much authority people perceive them to have, there will absolutely be a necessity for parallel systems. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Like, it's already happening. I'm sorry, I've done a lot of interviews, so I can't remember if I talked about this with you, but like cryptocurrency, that was a direct response. Bitcoin was a direct response to the 2008 financial crash. And it came out of necessity. It was like, hey, the system isn't working. It's only serving this tiny little tier of corporatists who inhabit the top and the government. And so someone did something and they were like, hey, here's a way to bypass the banking system. Here's a way to take the power away from them that they unjustly took from you and from us. And they have taken for years. And that's just one example. But there's so many, and there will be more. For even just like ocean cleanups, there's this great guy. I think he does get some funding from the Dutch government, but even if he didn't, he would still be funded by crowdsourcing. And it's called the Ocean Cleanup Project. And he's like this young kid who's concerned about all of the pollution in the oceans, all of the trash. And so he like dropped out of school, created this whole system. It's crowdfunded, and they go pick up plastic from the ocean. And last I saw or read, which was a couple years ago, he was working with like clothing companies and big companies to try to recycle the plastic. I don't see the government doing much to, like they talk a big game about climate change, but like, here's just some 20-something-year-old kid doing something about it. And I think that's what's so inspiring to me is there's so many individuals with such bright minds, with so many ideas, with such a desire to help that over time it's on our side, in my opinion. And on that note, just to make it a little more depressing lately, or to end on, let me make it depressing, but just something I've been thinking about lately is just how many people, just in all the wars, how many brilliant minds have been lost because they got sent off to die. How many wonderful things could we have? How much more advanced could we be if hundreds of millions of people had not been murdered on a battlefield for some elitist sitting on a throne or sitting in the Oval Office? Like, take away war, and we probably could have solved a lot of the problems now just because more people would have been around to innovate and to work together. So I think it's still positive, but that's why we got to end wars. And in the
but we wouldn't be able to blow the world up 20 times over if we hadn't had all these wars. We wouldn't have figured that out. So,
Right, exactly. And government, I mean, they are the kings of taking something that could potentially be fantastic and turning it into just destruction and murder.
Yeah. Well, I've had you for over an hour. Thanks for coming on again. We'll have to do it again. I can't stress to everyone enough. You should go follow Carey Wedler on YouTube. I've got a link in the description to her YouTube channel, and I think to her Twitter page. She was one of the voices that turned me around. So if you're wondering about this anarchy stuff, I'd really suggest going and watching her. Her videos are great. You might have to watch them twice because they're jammed full of really good content, and she does talk really fast, but they're totally worth watching.
I can't change it. I've tried. It doesn't work. But I have captions now for people who say that I speak too quickly. So I care about you too. Go out of my way.
Yeah, I'll just give you the last word. You can plug anything else you want, any other platforms you're using or anything you're doing in the near future that people should keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I don't even need to. I don't want to plug myself. I would just encourage people to think about. You don't even have to do it. Just think about going inward and becoming aware of what's going on in your inner experience when you're engaging in life, but also in politics, when you're talking to people on the internet. Like, maybe there's room for a little pause. For example, when I get like really heated and I'm like, I want to rage, I usually feel it in my chest. I feel this just like lurching forward, like, no, I have to go now. And it's not really fun. Like, I don't like to feel that way, and that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just what it is. It's not a judgment, but it's been very helpful to me to just become curious about what's going on internally. And I think that's incredibly important. As much as the technology, as much as the breaking people out of the status programming, those are all vital. But in my humble opinion, I think so is cultivating a sense of peace and calm and kindness within ourselves, to ourselves, so we can give it to others. Because I would like to live in a kind society that is in touch with our feelings. I don't want to just, if we had a libertarian utopia tomorrow, I don't think I'd want to live there. No offense, love you guys, but like, it would be like very reactive and very angry. And that's not wrong or bad. We're all entitled to our feelings, but I think there's a lot to be gained from taking responsibility, not only for your material life and everything that you experience in the world, but also what's going on internally.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, go subscribe to Carey Wedler on YouTube. You won't regret it. Although
you might. Don't speak too soon.
You might regret it if you don't like being awake. I mean, if I could, I wouldn't take the blue pill if I could. I wouldn't. But sometimes I wonder if I'd have more peace of mind if I didn't watch your burning my last Bridge with Obama shirt in 2014. Maybe I'd still be an idiot thinking everything was great. But
you wouldn't. You would have found another way. I know it.
All right. Well, thanks, Carey. We'll have to do it again.
Thanks for having me on. Talk to you soon.